Welcome to the Leo MonWell Podcast, where we talk about all things health, wellness, and success. Today, I have a personal friend of mine here. I brought him in here. I'm not going to admit this. Maybe today I'll admit it. But he challenges me a little bit. We go back and forth on a lot of different topics. It's giving interesting. It's giving so much fun, and it's giving the fight for my life. Let me introduce my good friend, Jonathan.
Hey, Leo, glad to be here. Big fan of the show.
Thank you so much for being here. And was I lying? Do we not challenge each other?
We can get into it from time to time, but conflict is an opportunity for growth. That's been my mantra for this year.
Ooh, what does that mean?
Kind of like trimming, like pruning hedges, like it's a chance to check in and say, hey, am I being served? Or, when there's interpersonal conflict, how can we grow stronger because of this?
Okay. I love that because honestly, when you look at like a relationship metaphorically, right? If you look at it, let's say like a bridge, right? A very good relationship is fortified. It's got different rungs and ladders built within the structure to handle the weight of every situation versus a card of house, like a house of cards, right?
Rope bridge.
A rope bridge.
A rope bridge.
Rope bridge, yeah. So then literally it's rickety, it's not built with reinforcements, and can easily collapse. So give me like the most recent relationship that you literally are like, I'm requalifying this. It may not have the strength of a bridge to withstand the future weathers like of my life.
I mean, for me, maybe I'm a bit of a classic overthinker. I feel like I'm doing that in like all of my relationships every day. Where it's like, obviously at different levels of intensity, but I feel like I'm always constantly checking in on where I am with people, where I feel how I am with people, and how that's influencing what's going on between us when we interact.
Okay. So do you think that it's true to the relationship that there's not enough like mutual security in the relationship that causes you to overthink? Or do you feel like it's you maybe possibly projecting from a different area?
I tend to understand it's an internal process that just makes me feel better in my relationships rather than any like strife I'm going through with an individual. But it's just constantly, it's the overthinking on my end. I understand it as a personal, not failing, but quirk, if you will. Where it's kind of like it makes me feel more secure in the relationship if I can go through and kind of be like, no, I'm happy with how I am. I'm happy with how they treat me. Like, yeah, that's what makes me feel more secure in relationships. And when I don't have answers to those questions, that's when stuff can get a little weird.
Okay. And so what answers are we looking for? I mean, because the thing is, sometimes relationships are crap, right? And you have to make a gut decision. Is this the crap I want to keep? Do I want the penthouse apartment with the broken sink? Or do I want to live in the great apartment downtown with the crap smell?
Right. Quality of relationships. And I mean, it's a matter of, what's, possibly, bothering you that day. But I think when I'm talking about, the day-to-day check-ins, I'm thinking like things like the basic stuff, is this person keeping a respectful tone? Do they listen when I speak to them? Are we engaged in a mutually beneficial relationship? And I think when you run into particular conflicts, that's when it's more important to gain the shape of things, understand where people are coming from, try to keep, and I guess that's why I'm doing the check-ins in relationships. I'm constantly trying to keep the other person's perspective not in the same esteem as mine, because my perspective is always going to be the one I'm biased towards, but make sure I'm still considering them as another person, a person I'm in a relationship with and presumably care about. Or maybe if I don't care about it,
You knew it. You read my mind. Yes. Yeah. So I love that because you read my mind, because literally I'm thinking, but all relationships aren't, symbiotic in a way. Sometimes, well, let me say this. They're not symbiotic in the formal way. We're all happy and kumbaya. Sometimes it's happy because it's an exchange.
Right. And I mean, people always say, relationships shouldn't be transactional. And like, obviously, if all your relationships are transactional, that's not necessarily ideal. But some relationships just simply are transactional. Like your relationship with your boss at work, like you go there because you get paid and you provide your labor or, provide a service or your expertise or whatever it is that you get paid for. It's transactional. And that's not necessarily bad. It is what it is.
So what's the bad part if someone says to you, like, I believe all relationships are transactional? What's the negative part of that?
Well, you just have to, I think if somebody says relationships are transactional, you want to make sure that that person is not engaging in the relationship solely out of their own self-interest. I think a relationship can be transactional while also being mutually beneficial, a win-win, as it were.
And this is what we're good for. This is what I'm going to push back just a little gently, right? And so I think if you come into a relationship, any relationship, motivated by self-interest, I think it's very positive as long as it's honest, right? Because the thing is, if I come into you and I say, I want this out of you, and this is what it's going to do for me, right? It sets the stage where it's like, if you don't want it, you can just walk,
Right.
or ask me to walk.
Right. And there's not something necessarily bad about moving out of self-interest. You just want to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of.
Ooh, so that's the line. So, right, someone living by self-interest, I come into your life motivated exclusively by my self-interest at your expense.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's and I mean, I don't want to say that everybody moves out of their self-interest, but like, I don't know that anybody's going around, living day to day, not in their own self-interest, doing things that are specifically and intentionally detrimental to their comfort, stability, whatever.
So I have a great question for you that only you can answer. I was saving this right in the back pocket. So do you think that self-interest has an intersection with astrology?
Yeah, I mean, I think even pop astrology, like the astrology that was popularized in like the 1970s, like popular astrology was focused on sun sign astrology. It's the one that you can get just by knowing someone's birthday. And I mean, the sun, astrologically speaking, it's the brightest thing in the sky. All the planets rotate around it. So, I mean, that's what I get out of it, is kind of, looking inward and then even further inward and then even further inward. And you kind of, I mean, so yeah, there's definitely an element of navel gazing, and you can definitely fall too far into that as well.
Well, and no, continue.
I don't.
Well, because the thing is, you said the concept of navel gazing, and I love looking deeper and deeper in within. And the thing that I pulled astrology in is because 3 things I talk about on my platform are always going to be health, wellness, and success, right? And when we're talking about navel gazing, when we're talking about astrology, when we're talking about relationships, right, and self-reflection, self-inventory, right, that's wellness. Wellness is specifically behaviors, right? How do you improve your life? Because a lot of people confuse health and wellness to be the same thing.
Right.
Health is just your status of being.
Right.
Right? We're just
what the doctor says.
What the doctor says, how I feel at that moment, right? But like, health isn't me walking a mile every day. That's wellness.
And I think that was the thing that even before I'd started picking up astrology and, studying, reading whatever book, whatever social media post, I've always been a person who's always like trying to be introspective and, well, yeah, I did that. I know I wanted to do that. Why did I want to do that? Do I actually want to do that? Have I been programmed to want to do that? And so I feel like my life has just been a continual process of reviewing, my cancer. So we're always looking back at the past, nostalgia, all that. So I'm always trying to figure out why I do the things I do, why other people do the things they do, and when we get mad at each other about it, how we can come back to it. I mean, figuring out why is part of the process of coming back to each other, conflict resolution.
So what about those irreconcilable relationships? And when you come back to them, it doesn't make sense to move forward. Do you think any of that has a correlation with signology, astrology? And I keep bringing it back here, audience, because this is a big part of a lot of people's understanding of the world, right? When you come up there and you say, hey, my name's Leo, right? There's an identity in that, and it comes from a grander place, the stars, whatever recollection, and possibly our connection to the universe. So I bring it back here as my subject matter expert because, man, he knows astrology's signs. I mean, he's smiling because he's being bashful, but I mean, he can whip up a chart in a second.
Well, it's fun philosophy, and it's a fun way to connect all the dots and try to make sense of things, which is that's all we're trying to do at the end of the day.
And why is that so important? Existentialism. Why is self-defining life so important?
I think I will, and this is getting maybe a little too esoteric, but I think we kind of live in an age that kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what's my greater purpose? I think maybe in the past people used to have more signs pointing them in a direction of who they could be, or and I don't know. I think it's becoming more important to figure out what you really want, not what you want, what you've been raised to want, what you might want to want but don't necessarily want. I think it's important to get to the core of why you do what you do.
Yeah. So you said, raised kind of like once or twice in this conversation, do you think like how we're raised forms who we are? Or do you feel like it's a disjointed process? Like no matter what household you were raised in, you wouldn't come out as a direct product of that.
I guess that's like my hot, well, it's not necessarily an astrology take or like a sexuality take when people say nature versus nurture.
Okay.
And it's really, I'd really feel it's both in an inextricable way, where it's just like, well, you come here as you are, but you're still, a compilation of all your experiences as well.
I'm going to hold you to the fire. If you had to pick one, and I know you want to say both, but if you had to say one was prevailing, even by a degree, 49, 51, what do you think out of those two concepts, nature versus nurture, the conversation that's been around since Darwin, what do you think is the prevailing motivator or movement or how we're designed?
Between nature and nurture, I'd probably give it to nurture because I guess the evidence shows that we're just intensely social creatures, maybe even more than we give ourselves credit for. And so, when I say you come in this world as you are, it's like, what does that mean? Even the natal chart in astrology isn't going to tell you what you are. It's just a potential possibilities and all that. So, what are you really but what you're made into, what you experience in this life?
So I love that, on this topic, on this episode, we're talking about wellness, and of all the things you chose, the wellness oriented one, right? Because nature would be health focused, right? How we're born, our innate physiology, right? Our innate biology, but wellness and choice and nurture fall under kind of self-definition, indoctrination, whatever, however you want to put it. There's good and bad words to show how someone's created and developed.
Right. And to hit on a third time, how I was raised is kind of like a thing. The thing that I was always raised with, the prevailing message was you're in control of your behavior. You might not be in control of, how you came into this world, the afflictions that you come into this world with or develop while in this world, but you can always control what you do. Okay. Even though there are a lot of influences that might be less under your control, if I want to move my arm.
When we're talking about nature versus nurture and we're talking about life and moving forward, how am I as an individual? What would you ask me or coach me if you were my friend or affiliate or a professional partner? How would you coach me if I came to you and I said, hey, I want to fix a certain behavior or habit? Especially if I, as a self-reflective person, how do you coach your friends? How do you give them the advice to get them on the other side?
I don't know that I get a lot of questions like that from friends, but I get my first instinct would be to ask, well, why do you want to change it? Like, if you want to change a behavior, what is it? Do you feel like it's unhealthy? Do you just not like doing it? Did you used to like it and you're not into it anymore? Did you associate it with a particular relationship that's maybe changed context? Is like, if you want to change something, why do you want to change it? And I think that I'm a person who, if I don't really want to do something, I'll find a way to not do it. So if I want to change something, I have to first do the research to make sure I actually want to do it.
Do you think
it probably won't happen?
No, well, you're right. Because the thing about it is like people don't do stuff that they're not committed to.
Mm-hmm.
Weight loss, smoking, whatever it is, people, if you're not committed to it, real stuff, people just don't do it. And then, it comes down to that nature versus nurture, right? Are certain people more likely to find the ability to stop doing something than others? Because predisposition is a thing.
And it's about motivate. Like we talk about, I feel like weight loss is a kind of a third rail where it's just like, well, I want to lose weight because I want to look hot. Like, if it's that important to you, let that be the reason. Like, if it's not important to you to lose weight or get in shape or improve your health because of the benefits to your health, don't make it about that.
Oh, wow. I love that because so somebody would push back and be like, oh, well, that's not no glorious, like, saving calories or whatever positive moral spin they want to put on the way. I love it. I love the concept of just getting healthy to look snatched.
If that's why you want it, if you want it bad enough, why couldn't it motivate you?
Right? Because at the end of the day, the motivation is still getting you both to the same result, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So if you need, I need to get my blood pressure down, I need to get my weight down, I need to get whatever is down, my kidneys, my heart functioning better, I need to improve my whole physiology, right?
Right.
That's a motivation, but I love that you're not taking away from someone, like someone's like, might look in the mirror. They just say, I just want to look
Which,
good.
you know, there's probably digging you could do on why it's that important for you to be attractive and look hot to you. I mean, you can always dig deeper, but I mean, the thing that I've learned at, you know, just, you know, on the job, you know, customer service job, but a thing that I've learned is maybe not super attractive. This is sometimes I'm motivated by spite. You get in my face about how, oh, you didn't do this and I thought you were going to do it. And, you know, I expected this from you.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be back tomorrow. Like, and maybe it gets done tomorrow, and it's not the most attractive motivator, but if it gets the job done, you know, in the short term at least, you know, why not get what you can out of it?
But the thing that you're kind of like touching on, like this like little dark thing in a cage that we never talk about, is like life isn't perfect, and just waking up each day, there's different reasons we do it.
Right.
And it's not the same Disney story for all of us.
Right.
Right? Sometimes it literally is showing up to work and saying, hell yeah, I'm going to stick it to the man just to get me through my 40 hours. You know, I'm going to stick it to whoever in a positive way, not even like about hostility or violence. It's just like by me being here and being excellent, you're angry.
Right.
And you're upset about that.
I'm gonna do it to prove you wrong, which is if you get it done, you get the added bonus of having proved them wrong. What's wrong with that?
Why do I just see you? Why do I see you? And I know we don't have the room for it, but literally your epic like in your face walk. I'm just imagining where
it can get a little haughty. There's a drama to it all.
Is it giving Renaissance walk away?
I did that. You saw me do it.
I love it because the thing is sometimes you do it just for the walk away. Where the mic drop.
And I mean, we talk about like the ego in psychology, right? And and people like kind of treat the ego like it's bad because, you know, moving out of ego isn't always something that, you know, wins you the most friends. But like, if we're accepting that scheme of the identity, it's part of it. It's a fundamental part of it. So I think the thing for me has been part of how I work on conflict resolution is realizing when that ego part of my psyche is what's moving me, for better or for worse, whether I agree with it. And then once I realize that that's what the motivator is, then I can decide whether I'm going to stick with that and keep moving with that. Or I say, hey, you know, I'm taking up this position because, you know, my pride is wounded. And I say, well, maybe your pride deserved defending in that moment. You know, like it's not necessarily wrong to move out of ego. It's wrong when you don't know you're doing it. That's when you start to look crazy to people.
Well, I think that when we're looking at topics like of wellness, right? We're looking at accepting the whole self, right? Mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, and just understanding that your id, ego, superego, your consciousness, your spirituality is all a part of you. And if you're not defending you on each level within reason, right? Like, I don't think like, you know, metaphorically, like blowing up the ship with us both on it just to win an argument. I don't think that's the best.
If I won? No, I'm kidding.
Why did I see you with a lighter?
It might work. But now, yeah, the point is to try to integrate and balance all of those components of the identity, not to reject any one of them as not useful or detrimental, because they're all you at the end of the day, I guess.
So I think that, you know, you have two types of people with two identities, right? You have like people who are trying to do better with their identity, and you have people who are trying to do worse. And when I say trying to do worse, intentional, let's say self-sabotage, whether it is
lean in, make excuses, like, well, this, and I hate to call it the victim mentality because a lot of people have been victimized, but it's like,
what is the victim mentality, just for people to know?
I mean, I guess it's I mean, I don't have like an expert definition, but I guess it's kind of like when you sort of attach your identity to the idea of a person who has been wronged, had something done to you that was unjust. It shouldn't have happened. And that's a real place to be. But I guess the bad part is when you take that into all your interactions. It's probably not always the case that you're always, you know, the one who's being victimized.
Yes. And I think, you know, the pop culture term of like victim mentality kind of spawned from like learned helplessness, right? You have no ability and accountability.
But no one's ever asking who taught helplessness when we talk about learned helplessness.
Give me more.
But these things come from somewhere, right? Is it when someone experiences trauma, it's not necessarily that someone, is at fault, is a villain in that story, but they might have inflicted the trauma. If you bump into somebody, you quote unquote inflicted trauma on them, however unintentional or relatively harmless it was. That's the dynamic. Somebody experienced the trauma and somebody presumably inflicted it.
So are you saying that all harm that we experience is not intentional?
I'm not saying all harm. There's a lot of it is.
No, I'm saying, let me restate. So throughout our whole lives, people do things to us, right? What I'm saying is every act where someone does something that hurts our feelings intentionally malicious?
No, of course not.
Okay. And why would you say that it's not? Because my feelings are hurt. My ego is so valid.
Well, that just doesn't feel like a very humanistic perspective on the way other people work. I know I've behaved with malicious intent before, but I know I don't do it on a daily basis. And if I did move with malicious intent on a daily basis, I would be concerned about my mental health.
Okay. So you're saying that we could be in a heated conversation, right? And you hurt my feelings. You hurt my ego, right?
It happens all the time, many such cases.
In normal life, right? And so how does one live with that? How do I move forward with that without attacking you or belittling you or taking it personal?
I mean, sometimes it happens. I'm certainly, the haughtiness we talked about, it definitely comes out in conflict, in arguments. And I mean, the best way I can answer your question, what I try to do is just try to always lead with authenticity, like try to be honest about my motivations, about my intentions in the moment. Like if I said something with the intent to hurt you, I tend to try to own up to that later, because I probably know how it sounded when I said it. If it sounded mean, I might have meant it mean. But I think I think the only way to really truly resolve conflict is to kind of lead with authenticity. Like, hey, this hurt my feelings. This is how you made me feel, whether it's reasonable or not, whether it turns out that the other person also agrees that your feelings are valid, is not irrelevant to the conflict, but I think it's irrelevant. It's sometimes irrelevant to you getting closure. I think sometimes the way to closure is to only be able to look back and say, I did the best I could. And I mean, I think maybe sometimes when people don't get closure is when they don't feel like they did everything they could in any given situation.
Well, and I think the sense of like, okay, is closure at the intersection of ego?
Yeah, for sure. I think closure is about ending the narrative that you constructed in your mind, whether it's
repeat that.
I think closure is crafting an ending for a narrative that you've created in your mind. So I think you're not. Well, everybody doesn't get closure. Whether I was going to say nobody's entitled to closure, but people feel differently. But sometimes you don't get it. Yeah. And sometimes the story doesn't have a clean ending, whether it's a happy ending, a sad ending. Sometimes it just ends.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think closure is sometimes an attempt to say that it was all for a reason. Right. And sometimes, and even if you believe that everything is for a reason, that reason's not always clear to us. So everybody doesn't get closure, and that's part of it. So I would say that, yeah, I think sometimes closure is a motivation of the ego to say, and that's the end, and we're at peace with that.
Okay.
Which is nice to have, but you're not entitled to, and you don't always get.
No, it's true. And the thing is, this is when, especially when I'm working with a patient, right, and someone has suddenly taken from them, right? And then all of a sudden they are now like, my life is discombobulated and you've robbed me of closure. Because sometimes when people are passing away slowly, you get closure because all the unopened, unchecked boxes can be checked off. But in time, like rapid events, it doesn't. So speaking of closure, as we're at the end of our time together, we've talked about a lot of wellness, nature versus nurture. We've talked about astrology. We've talked about the ego. We've literally gone to here and back.
Typical.
Yeah. Very real to our conversations in real life. But I want to give you a moment to leave the audience with someone who is struggling with how to see within themselves. As someone who reflects on their actions, how would you coach our audience to take a self-inventory every now and again, and why it's important?
I'm not sure how I would coach someone.
Or let's say how you do. How do you take a self-inventory and improve from there?
Well, I feel like I'm being flipped, but I spend a lot of time looking in the mirror, and
Okay.
I think that's a thing. Just that kind of being able to engage with yourself. I think that's how my process of behavioral analysis goes. If there's a particular behavior that I do that has questions, you look at it. Why did you do that? Are you happy with what you did, or would you do it again? Like, I mean, you kind of just gotta start with the man in the mirror. Take a look at this. I mean, you got to focus on the self in order to be able to sustain with others.
I mean, you said it great. Because the thing is, no, true. Hair.
But I pulled it together. I'm proud of it too.
Well, and I think the mirror technique is one of like the oldest techniques in acting and in mental health counseling. You know, having people take a self inventory by looking at a physical item, looking at a friend, and just seeing what you see back. Like even asking people, when I make faces, what do I look like? What do I experience? And then allowing yourself to perceive that and make better choices.
Because I forget throughout the day. If I'm going about the day, I forget that I look like me. I mean, I don't know if everybody experiences that, but yeah, it's a recentering to look in the mirror and know what people are getting when you step out into the world.
I love it. I love it. So this has been such a wonderful episode. I thank you all for watching. Take a few seconds to look deep within and practice wellness. It's never a bad thing to check in with yourself in the mirror, check in with yourself every now and again. Jonathan, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
And you will probably see him more, definitely, because these conversations are good.
I'll be glad to be back. Thank you.
Until next time, keep practicing self-reflection and wellness. So for more content like this and to keep the conversation going, remember, subscribe, comment, stay engaged, and for all things health, wellness, and success, I'm Leo MonWell. Tune into the next episode.